welcome to another episode of Feelin It Fridays, where I share with you some music that I am feeling in hopes that it'll expose you to some new artists, some new sounds, a new way that you might be able to get down and dance. The song on this episode is called Vacuum Boogie by Floating Points off the Vacuum Boogie EP. This is an older song in the catalog of Floating Points, and I am a huge fan of this guy's music. He is drastically different in terms of what he's doing with his sound today versus when this Vacuum Boogie EP came out some years ago. In my research about this artist to learn more about his creative process and how he would come up with these sounds, or just to kind of figure out what made this guy tick, because I've been so into his music for so long, I came across an interview, I think that was on Rebel Music Academy, where he was doing a sit-down interview, and he explained how around the time period of Vacuum Boogie, or maybe it was this song in particular, when he listens to it in present day, how kind of just not satisfied he was or is with the sound of it, meaning that where this guy's head's at today versus where this song was made is drastically different. And I think that's a really interesting thing to throw out, because as we listen to this song, and the attachment that I have to the song being that it's one of my favorite, I would say, dance tracks of recent years, to hear him say that he's just not satisfied with it, and it kind of makes him cringe a little bit when he hears the way it was mixed and, I don't know, maybe produced, I'm not exactly sure. It really inspires me, because as an artist creating music or dance or anything else that I'm creating, you always tend to look back on things and say, you know, I'm not satisfied, or it wasn't good enough. Or something that you're making now, you may think that it's never good enough or it's never finished. And to have somebody like that, who obviously I'm a fan of Floating Points, and for him to say things like that about one of my favorite songs that he's ever made, it means that the stuff I'm doing may not be as bad as I think it is. So just a little precursor as we go into this song. As this song starts out, it has all the ingredients that I enjoy about something that would be considered like deep house. I don't know if Floating Points would consider this the genre of deep house, but it starts out with that heavy kick. It's very almost kind of like lo-fi, warm, saturating pads that are kind of coming in, and it really creates this big blanket of sound right from the gate. One thing that's really unique about Floating Points' kick drum patterns in this period of music is that they're heavily swung, and the syncopation of where some of the notes come in on the returns or the end of the bar, or maybe it's in the middle of a particular series of bars, it creates this live feeling. And I don't know if he's programming this or if he's playing this by hand, but it's something that I always thought was really, really interesting, that I'm sure other music, dance music, does this, but at the time period when I was getting into this music, it was an eye-opener for me in terms of how I dance and how I would rely on such a quantized or a specific exact kick drum to be there. This song didn't have that. As the song's intro begins to climb up, that pad and those sustaining notes and sounds sitting deep in the background, very saturated, very heavy, not bright, very dull, sitting way in the background, and we hear these foreground elements like a clap and a hi-hat, and kind of like an open, very much sounds like an 808, could be a 909 I guess, but kind of an analog drum machine style hi-hat that opens up with a long release or a long tail on it, where the syncopated kick drum with the hi-hat opening up very bright, very much in the front, and then all this warm pad in the background filling out the backing of the track, you get a sense of climbing, and the notes being added on piece by piece in these background sustaining notes to create a behind the scenes kind of crescendo where the track starts to climb up. You feel the energy kind of swelling from the bottom and making its way up to where ultimately becomes kind of the initial jump off point for how this track ends up throwing down. As we continue to climb and continue to climb and continue to climb, and in comes more synthetic elements along with some simple percussion or kind of backing rhythms like the shaker that comes in, not too violent, kind of rhythmic-y that follows that kick drum and the same kind of gives you that swinging feel with the but really where a lot of that energy comes from in this track as we continue to build is the filter on those backing pads, or maybe it's a new pad that's being bled in, that's being introduced, starts to open up. Then we get this bright synthetic sound that starts to come in and starts to really open up and kind of create some sparkle to what was dull in the background before. And he also starts to introduce kind of two other really obvious synthetic elements as this buildup is occurring. One is kind of what I would say is one of his signature synthesis that you hear in a lot of his tracks, and it's kind of like this gliding lead, this and I know that I always make the synths sound horrible when I try to mouth them, but this synth comes in and he chooses these notes to kind of like glide up and send you up, and it creates some sense of tension, and they're so perfectly matched with the rest of the sound design in the song. To me, it cuts through, but it also sits in the background, so you can really as you get to know the song, you can express yourself to that synth, or it can be something that just kind of tells the story in the background while you continue to be rhythmic in the way that you move and groove to the song. Also, he adds in these really dazzling kind of monophonic, blippy type sounds that really act as like a texture to me. It's a way that he kind of sprinkles it, and it gets heavier and heavier right as we come up to that build up, that crescendo piece that ends up dropping out, mixed with lots of other kind of atmospheric swirls and modulations. You just get this a ton of, without trying to shit on the song, you get a bunch of noise that really fills so much space that it's so bright but so thick and oversaturated that you almost lose sight of the fact that there was this rhythmic dance component going on in the background. But that's what's really cool about it. It draws your attention away from kind of that initial piece, and it brings you up into what I would say is this euphoric state. And then as all that drops out, this is where you're left with, for me, and I would say for the majority of people, the ooh. And that's the when you hear it in the club, you go ooh. And that ooh, that's that heavy subsonic, just mashing rhythmic bass sound that comes in and just slaps you. Doom, 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 doom. Man, and it's so rhythmic, just like the kick drum. Just like those other simplistic percussion elements, it's got like kind of this swinging, grooving vibe, but it's so heavy. And really, this song doesn't get the love and appreciation unless you have a sound system that is going to be able to carry that frequency right to your chest plate. You listen to this in a club and it's unmistakably wonderful. As we continue along in this super awesome groove, and the song is just a mixture of these warm pads with these bright tones that float around on top, that solid groove that we started everything off with. You have a lot of this live instrumentation. It's like synthetic jazz going on with what Floating Points decides to do with little pad stabs or kind of polyphonic chord stabs that he's got, where he's got kind of these wow, 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 wow. It's like a call and response kind of rhythm that creates another sense of melody on top of the melody that the bass gives you, as well as another lead where he's kind of doing this jumping an octave and creating this call and response. These call and responses in dance music, no matter how they're interpreted, whether it's very synthetic or whether it's very organic in the instrumentation, whether it's vocal, whether it's actual instruments, whether it's sound effects and stuff that that we identify as maybe a texture, no matter what it is that we choose, when there is this element, this polyrhythmic element of call and response in dance music, there's something kind of inherently natural about how we interpret this stuff, and it creates, at least for a dancer, kind of this go-to of call to me, I respond. I call to you, you respond. And as the movement that we create develops and we're creating rhythmic patterns or movement that we do over and over again, these pieces in dance music really work out for us. And this can go back to when you look at traditional cultural musics of various different places on this planet, you tend to see this as a formulaic structure in the most basic storytelling or the most basic spiritual or the most basic religious context. And this song, so synthetically overdrived, has that really human element to it. And that's probably what I've always associated with Floating Points being this kind of like jazz mastermind of dance floor music, especially around this time period, especially with this song. As the song continues to progress, elements start to kind of leave out and we start to hear these what I was referring to as these polyphonic sounds and monophonic sounds, creating this call and response, the stab, the chordal stab, the and the whoop, 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 whoop. Like these sounds begin to become more bright, more apparent, more upfront, and some of the richness and some of the kind of body of the synthetic pieces that brought us up to this point start to dip out, and we start to get a more naked form of the arrangement of the song. And this kind of brings us out. This is really, you know, from I guess you could say from a DJ's perspective, it starts to feel like you have an opportunity for a mix out point. Again, I don't know what was going through Floating Points' head when he was making this, but when a dancer hears the mix out point, we tend to lose, or when the arrangement starts to fall out to the mix out point, we tend to lose energy in the way that we display our movement, or at least I do. So things become a bit more calm. I begin to latch onto elements that aren't so heavy or so have so many notes in time. In other words, less speed. I tend to look for things that go through the beat, or I can latch onto once in a while with my movement. And this song begins to taper off in kind of a way that makes sense. You feel like the story is coming to an end. And it's crazy because you get on this ride so early. It's like you're at the top of the roller coaster, and as you drop down through this crazy corkscrew, which is this subsonic beat you over the head bass line, you're then let out at the bottom, really just cruising and floating away all the way to the end. And man, the ride was super dope. One of my favorite tracks of all time, absolutely. And if I could say one more thing about this song that I find really interesting, and this is not necessarily a dance perspective, although it is if we think about this in a more clever way. This song was, if I'm not mistaken, is around 116, maybe 115 beats per minute, which by club dance standards, by what most of the music that I hear when I go out to like a house club or something, it would be considered incredibly slow. I mean, usually you see anywhere from 120 to 125, upwards of 128, where, you know, at the, peak hours of the night, DJs are really trying to drive a faster tempo to really keep the energy up. That's not the only way things are done, but just as a generality, I don't know how much truth that has everywhere in the world, but I would say the club culture here in the Bay, from what I'm used to, this song, you can actually push from that 116 BPM upwards of that 120 plus BPM, and it still has all of the same kind of goodness about it without sounding weird. And that's interesting to point out, because Floating Points might not have been considering this when he was making what, he probably didn't consider a prime time of the night deep house track that could be dropped, with any other high energy deep house track, because it is so slow. And maybe that wasn't what he was thinking. Maybe he was thinking kind of at the end of the night, this is a great song for the end of the night at your 3, 4, 5 in the morning type of joint. But this has an incredible way to bend from slow to fast and still keep all of its beauty. And I mention that because with dance and the movement that we create in response to music like this song, we can do the same thing. We don't always have to try and keep up with the speed of light. We can slow down and we can still be beautiful. At the same time, we can speed up certain things to also create beauty, and we can be everywhere in between. Some things in our movement will work better slower and faster, while some things will not work slow and some things will not work fast. And it's a lesson that we learn as we become more comfortable in our dance, in our movement, in our go-to, the things that are inherent and subconscious about what we do, because we tend to hear a certain style or a certain speed of music and we walk away from those things that are just inherently awesome with what we can do. We go to different styles, different movements, different feelings, and all these things are valid when we hear different sounds. But this song teaches me a valuable lesson that from slow to fast, the roots and what makes a song beautiful work no matter what. So if that's anything that I could say to where this music inspires my dance, is that it taught me that I can do what I do best to anything that I want. And a lot of the times it's not only going to feel great, but it's going to translate in terms of artistic expression. That is Vacuum Boogie off the Vacuum Boogie EP by Floating Points, one of my favorite songs of all times. So glad I got to introduce this song to you. If you're feeling these videos like I'm feeling this song, subscribe, comment, like, maybe hit me up on social media. Let me know what I could do better, what you might like to see. Yeah, these videos are a lot of fun. I appreciate you. Thanks for checking it out. Go buy some music. Peace.